Hi, Dallas. I'm Dr. Kelvin Baggett, the City of Dallas COVID-19 Health and Healthcare Access Czar. As the parent of 2 school-aged children, I have to say that one of the most important things to me is that our children are able to return to school and to remain in school safely. As a physician, I know oh too well how COVID-19 has impacted lives, resulting in infection and sickness for some, and resulting in death for others. What I also know is that we've seen the measures that can be taken to reduce the spread of COVID-19. And I implore you to do those things consistently. Get tested, wear a mask, wash your hands, and avoid large crowds. Thank you.
Hey Dallas, I'm Councilmember Casey Thomas, representing District 3. We're in this together to stop COVID-19 because it's the right thing to do. Remember, get tested, wear a mask, wash your hands, avoid crowds. Thank you, and let's stay on guard, Dallas.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for our amazing, wonderful guests that we have this morning, this afternoon, I should say. It's noon, it's lunchtime. So we're going to be talking about breaking barriers to voter participation, right? We know that in 2020, we celebrate the 100-year anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote, but also recognizing, right, especially in this moment of racial reckoning in our country, that many communities, including Black women, Latinas, right, Indigenous women, AAPI folks, had to struggle for a long time after that to gain the same rights as white women and their counterparts. And so today we've got our wonderful panelists who are going to be talking to us about kind of what their role is, where they see their work fitting into this larger legacy of fighting for not just social justice for our communities, but really talking about the intersectionality of those movements and how working together really is what's going to make us stronger. So I'm going to go ahead and let our panelists introduce themselves, and we'll take it away. Ashley, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Shan. I'm a member of the Dallas Youth Commission, and I represent District 13.
Good morning. I'm Stephanie Mace. I am the Vice President of Strong Communities at United Way of Metropolitan Dallas. I oversee our advocacy, public policy, and coalition building efforts. And over the past 6 or so months, that's really expanded to include how we can support the efficiency and safety of our elections in our community.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Summer Iqbal. I'm a Muslim, a first-generation American, child of immigrants, and a public servant. I currently serve as the Executive Assistant to the Chief of Equity and Inclusion at the City of Dallas. And I'm also proud to say that this year I completed my tenure on the Dallas Young Women's Advisory Council, which is hosted by the Texas Women's Foundation's Young Women's Initiative. So looking forward to a great conversation today.
Thank you all so much. So let's get into it. Let's hear about the projects. We'd love to hear about what projects you are working on in the DFW area, what you talked about the communities that you belong to, the communities that you serve. I really want to hear about what are some of those projects and things that you're doing in the community to protect our democracy, to protect the rights of voters, and to expand those rights as well. Summer, since you finished us off last, you wanted to take it away.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you so much again. So I want to expand a little bit on the Dallas Young Women's Advisory Council, also called WAAC. So it was created by the Texas Women's Foundation as an intervention to address inequities and disparities that young women of color face today. In Texas, 68% of young women are young women of color. So young women is defined as ages 15 to 24. And a lot of studies show that these young women of color face greater challenges when it comes to poverty, when it comes to education. Young women of color have higher teenage birth rates than their white counterparts. And all of those disparities can be passed on to the next generation. So as a WAAC council member, I served as a subject matter expert on my lived experiences and what issues impact young women of color and how to overcome those issues and forge a positive future. So through that effort, I participated in a number of civic engagement opportunities, including census canvassing, speaking at events, participating and conducting self-evaluations and research, and ultimately just building a close-knit community with my cohort members and my mentors. And I wanted to share this experience to emphasize that while voting is absolutely critical and foundational to our democracy, and particularly women of color, it's so critical that we get our votes in and our voices heard. I want to emphasize that it's not the only thing that we can do to build a community of care. So voting is part of the fabric of community building. And when we vote, we flex our power and we make our voices heard and show and shape a democracy that's reflective of our voices. But civic engagement needs to be a constant practice that goes beyond just electoral politics. And the WAAC really helped me build that constant practice and build that civic engagement. And I say all of this while also recognizing that there's a lot of systemic barriers that are placed on communities of color when it comes to voting. And just to expand a little bit more, as a Muslim person, I know that there's a lot of barriers when it comes to voting for the Muslim community. Muslims make up 1% of the population in the US, but 26% of all Muslims are not eligible to vote because they're non-citizens. And they're also the group that's least likely to be registered to vote out of other religious groups. But I don't want to play into the stereotype that minorities are stuck in permanent adverse situations. And I want to emphasize that studies also show that Muslims are engaging in that engagement practice and going beyond just political or electoral politics. So, there's negative trends and there's positive trends, but all of it shows that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And there needs to be greater turnout for Muslims and for young women of color.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Summer, for sharing that. And definitely in every community, right? It's like, how are we facilitating those conversations in our communities to make sure that, one, we realize our own power, but also how are we working to empower others, right, as well, whether it be through advocacy or voting. I should mention that definitely I'm also representing Familia, and also as a DACA recipient, right, this work is important to me because as someone who isn't able to vote myself, right, making sure that all my friends and peers and networks and family members are, right, exercising that right to vote. So Ashley, definitely want to hear from you and the amazing work you're doing.
Thank you again for inviting me to panel and to talk with everyone today. I think as someone who identifies with three groups who are just super severely underrepresented within American governance, a woman, an Asian American, and a part of the youth, the issue of voter participation is something that's uniquely important to me. And the only way that we can ever get the status quo to change and get that representation is through individual voters using their power and their voice to engage civically. In order to truly get into the work that I've done on the Youth Commission, I think it's kind of necessary to establish the context of voting within the United States. The fundamental component of democracy, the right that we all have, or that Americans should have, was denied for many populations over a number of centuries within the US. In 1776 and before, only Christian white men over the age of 21 who owned property had the right to vote. Then in 1920, the 19th Amendment granted suffrage to women, but voting still remained really inaccessible to women of color. And then in 1952, the McCarran-Walter Act granted all Asian American women the right to citizenship and vote. And in 1970, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 changed the voting age to 18. And even though that we've made like that progress in terms of legislation, those changes in voting laws and those restrictions still have a huge impact on what we see today and the turnout that we see today in terms of participation in civic engagement. Even though women are 51% of the population, they still make up less than a quarter of representatives nationally, and also in terms of like state legislator and local elections. Women and Asian Americans and the youth are severely underrepresented. And as a youth commissioner whose duty is to ultimately represent Dallas's youth and advocate for the youth voice, I've kind of focused on a number of initiatives that ensure that the last subset that I've focused on, the youth, are engaged and are able to participate civically within government and politics within America. Some of the things that I've done in my time on the Youth Commission are proposing changes to election officials in terms of election polling places. So we've kind of discussed how we can make voting more accessible to those who are part of the youth, like making polling places and moving them to college campuses or adding polling places to college campuses so that college students don't have to travel a long way to go to those polling areas and go out and vote. I've also led the Youth Commission and like statewide created the Texas Student Voices, which is a coalition of Texas youth commissions that engages with those in Texas legislature and basically presents a bill of demands to those in Texas legislature about what the youth want to see being discussed and want to see basically being discussed within Texas legislature, as well as just like what we want from our representatives. And I've also designed the Youth Voter Pre-Registration Project, which is hopefully going to be discussed in Texas legislature next year, which is basically a proactive way to pre-register individuals that are 16 and 17, and changing the pre-registration voter requirement from 17 years and 10 months within Texas to 16 or 17, and having individuals be able to pre-register before the election comes up. I think in terms of a racial and ethnic context, the reason why engaging youth is so important is because American youth is slowly and surely becoming more diverse in terms of both racial makeup and political opinion. Especially in Texas, our electorate is younger and more diverse than the national average, which is why competent civic engagement among youth is especially critical. It's not just that without having that representation, we kind of undermine the core functioning of our democracy. We also don't have that diversity being represented, and we don't have politicians that are really reflecting the youth voice in office. The reason why I believe youth voice, and especially when it intersects with the racial and ethnic context, the reason why I believe that's so important is because we're going to be the ones that are grappling with the effects that legislation and representatives make in the next few years. That legislation that's created now is going to be the things that are affecting us as youth 5, 10, 50 years down the line. So it's really important to ensure that we're engaging now, we're building those habits, and we're being civically engaged so that we ensure that our voice is heard, and that we can be civically engaged in the future and actually be able to deal with those effects of legislation that representatives are making right now.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Stephanie Mace with United Way. I'm honored to be on this panel and honored to be speaking and serving alongside Ashley and Summer, who I'm very impressed and a little intimidated with the work that y'all have been doing. At United Way, we are focused on what we consider the building blocks of a strong community. So the education, financial stability, and health. And ensuring that everybody in our community has access, and to seeing where we can do to support their education, health, and financial stability throughout. I think people traditionally see United Way as a grant maker, but we do a lot more than that. So we mobilize volunteers to support nonprofits and key topics in our community. We develop initiatives and programs where there are gaps. And kind of my area is advocating for public policy changes at the local, state, and federal level. A lot of the work that a lot of the issues that we focus on are issues that we hear from our nonprofits or our programs in the community. One of the things that we have focused on heavily over the past decade is payday and auto title lending, and trying to pass reasonable reforms on those lenders, expanding childhood education, and kind of a wide range of social justice issues that are really of concern to everybody in our community, especially those that are looking for some type of support and help. So over the past decade or so, United Way has done a lot in the Get Out the Vote, educating folks on to become deputy voter registrars, going to colleges to register voters, doing awareness and educating folks on the upcoming elections, where to get accurate, nonpartisan information. And over about 4 months ago, we helped to establish the Dallas Votes, which is a new coalition that is focused on providing support to the Dallas County Elections Department to ensure that in this very unique election time, that they are that the elections are safe, accessible, and efficient. And one of the things that there are quite a few things that we have done to recruit more poll workers and any other type of election workers that are necessary, provide support in identifying new sites if they're needed, or if there were any closures, to try and identify new sites that are in the general area, since we have kind of a broad coalition of folks. So United Way, there's a large faith component, or large faith sector of our coalition, and then a lot of civic organizations like the League of Women Voters, the Civil Rights Project. So trying to see what we can do to leverage our connections, our in-kind resources to provide support to the elections. It's a very interesting time in that we're seeing more registered voters than we've ever seen, 1.3 in Dallas County. We're also having to implement COVID standards and social distancing, while also seeing a huge increase in the number of voters, not just new voters, but traditionally individuals that have been registered that don't traditionally go out to the polls. Along with new polling machines in a lot of places, a lot of misinformation, lack of information, a lot of lawsuits that we've seen at the state level, which has really confused a lot of individuals on where they can vote, how they can vote, what they're eligible for. So trying to do a lot around expanding information and trying to clarify some of the communication that is out there. We are a week away from Election Day, and doing as much as we can to encourage folks to participate in early voting. And what we try and call is kind of flattening the voting curve. We know that a lot of individuals participate and go to vote on Election Day, but doing as much as we can to encourage people to vote in early voting to reduce the numbers on Election Day and to really spread out the time when people are going out to vote.
Definitely. Thank you all so much for sharing. And all this is such important work, and the work that Stephanie was talking about with the Dallas Votes Coalition, Mi Familia Vota, the organization that I work with is on this coalition, along with March to the Polls and so many other amazing organizations that are working to defend that access to democracy and to make sure that voting is accessible and safe, obviously in this moment especially. And so Mi Familia Vota is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works to increase civic engagement in the Latino, immigrant, and allied communities, right? So we kind of cover the gamut of what it means to be civically engaged, as Summer so accurately pointed out. Now, voting is one step in this process that is civic engagement, right? Especially when we're talking about our young folks, right? Young people care about things, right? Communities of color, women, we all care about things in our community, things that benefit these groups of people are going to benefit our community at large. And so, yeah, super excited to be here and talk about, some of the voting work that we're doing. Obviously, we're doing a lot of get out the vote work. We're at the doors, right? We're keeping a safe distance. We're talking to folks in the community, making sure that Latinos and folks who, not traditional voters, right? Folks who aren't being being reached out to by bigger, larger institutions, right? Making sure that the voices that they're hearing, right, is the voices of all of our wonderful panelists, right? Because you are the trusted voices. And so with that, wanted to ask you all, how do you see your work fitting in terms of carrying out this legacy of the fight for women's suffrage, for youth suffrage, and so on, part of this like larger fight?
I mean, I think Summer put it best. Even though we're kind of all focusing on the election that's coming up and engaging voters, the issue of civic engagement is far, far larger than just voting in an election. It's being able to create habits and ensuring that people are going out to the polls or even just like engaging with politicians so that their voice is heard. And hopefully, I hope that my work on the Youth Commission is able to engage that subset of voters within Dallas to not only go out and vote in the future, but also engage with politicians, engage with the legislation that's going on a local level, not just national, being able to understand what's going on within politics. It's super necessary in order to harness the power that your voice has and your voice and your advocacy has. And hopefully, like all of the initiatives that we're designing on the Youth Commission are going towards that and ensuring that that voice is really, really embraced and heard within Dallas.
I think Ashley did a great job of really articulating. I'll just kind of add that, I think it's really easy for us to really get focused on our jobs and our everyday life. And we, in some cases, aren't connected to the advocacy groups or others that are pushing for changes in the areas that we believe in. So doing a job, I feel like one of the things that United Way does, and I really like to do, is pull together all of the different stakeholders that are passionate about voting or, any of the issues that we support to see how we can have that stronger voice. And also educating folks on the different levels of government, how to engage, what are the functions of each of the government entities and municipalities, what's the best way to communicate with them, and even just encouraging them to have a conversation outside of the election season. So scheduling a meeting with your elected official, a lot of them have coffees at the Capitol or coffee at City Hall to learn more about, about your elected officials, what they think are the priorities of your community, make them aware of your story and what you're concerned about, maybe your background, your history, why you're living in your community, your number one priority, and to give a face. When we talk to nonprofits and social workers, we need to give a face to some of the issues that we're fighting for, because in a lot of cases it's just numbers or it is a bill or something that we're really pushing. But until they're able to see a constituent in that bill, a story, a face, a person's name, then it really gets more personal, and it could be something that they fight a little harder for.
Yeah, and I just want to echo what Stephanie actually said as well. I had the opportunity to work at a congressional office a few years ago, and I learned that the stories that constituents share really makes a difference. Not when we provide these stories, we also have to corroborate it with quantitative data. And that's why data and research is so important when it comes to communities of color and when it comes to advocating for ourselves in the civic sphere. And I think in terms of how I see my work carried out through suffrage, I think what I'm looking forward to is building a career in which I can build off of the advances that my elders and that my ancestors have made so far, and recognizing that this is generations worth of work that we need to carry on and move forward, and we can't give up. we have to continue to push for a vision of equity and justice and inclusivity for all. And so I'm really grateful that I have a lot of women in my life that I can look up to as mentors and that I can help carry the work forward.
Definitely. And as obviously, and just in hearing you all speak, it's very clear that you all are the experts, right, in your communities that are seeing, right, that we're seeing in these movements and these different initiatives. So that seems to be like a pattern, right, in terms of advancing social justice, advancing and expanding the electorate, and expanding these rights and civic engagement in general, right? People who are the most impacted should be the ones, right, leading the charge. Those voices, like you're saying, those stories are the ones that should be uplifted. So I wanted to hear a little bit about how you've seen this particular element play out in your work, in your community, but also in the broader Dallas community in North Texas. Go ahead, Summer. Yeah, take it away.
Sorry, my mic wasn't working. But yeah, I'm happy to jump in on this question because it speaks so directly to the work of the Dallas Young Women's Advisory Council. And through the WAAC, like as a member, I was able to get connected with so many expert women of color in their fields, whether it be nonprofit, philanthropy, the public sector. So the WAAC really created a structure for me to learn from women of color and to, like I said, help move that work forward. And the WAAC is all about creating opportunities for young women of color that may not be there in any other way. The WAAC's research shows that young women of color in Dallas report feelings of inadequacy at a much higher rate than their white counterparts. So we need to think about how are we creating safe environments where young women of color can feel like they're thriving and that their image or their status, their class, their race, their gender doesn't impede the opportunities that they have. So I know that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in Dallas in terms of getting women in leadership and amplifying those expert voices. But I'm really encouraged by all of the women that I'm seeing right now, like not only here on this panel, but also like throughout this conference and beyond this conference. There's so many amazing women of color that are doing the hard work to advance equity in Dallas. And I'm very confident that we're going to be making positive strides moving forward.
There are some great nonprofits in the Dallas community that are taking their efforts to the next step by, similar to what Summer was saying, that are training their mothers and their grandmothers and their community members to really be empowered and to share their stories. So in the Bachman Lake community, they are focused on educating their mothers on becoming the advocates for their child and educating them on the school district and the school system and how to talk to the teachers. There are faith communities that are holding trainings for their parishioners to talk to them and introduce them to the candidates for different races. There are a lot of opportunities in our community to really elevate the voices of folks that don't traditionally speak up or feel like they're heard or feel like their voice matters. And so we really need to figure out how to amplify these voices, but then also how to bring more together. Voter turnout is also really low because a large number of our folks do not feel empowered, do not feel like their voice matters, feel like the system isn't set up for them to be a part of it. And that kind of goes along with kind of the whole continuum of our political process. And so doing what we can at all levels throughout that continuum to elevate not just the special interest groups, but the voices and the concerns for everybody in our community. And I'm hoping after this election, since we are seeing kind of the record voter turnout rates, that we will see more individuals in our community that are that are eager to stay involved in the legislative process and to stay engaged with their elected officials and to call for more changes to policies, but then the practices and transparency and accountability.
Definitely. So I know you all are doing amazing work in various different communities. So I want to hear a little bit, how do you approach your work in terms of through a racial equity lens?
I think, unfortunately, so much of American governance still relies on the system that was designed to block out certain groups and block out individuals from even participating in the process. So I think whenever engaging with American government as a whole and voter participation, it's necessary to look at the government and look at what you're doing through that racial and equity lens, because we need to be able to spot what's going on, things like gerrymandering, other active efforts by governments to block out those subsets of individuals and subsets of voters. The only way that we can ever actually get to equity and actually ensure that everyone's represented equally, everyone is being able to use the power of their voice, is through looking through that racial equity lens and through ensuring that we're being aware of what's going on rather than kind of just looking away from the really unfair things that are going on within American governance.
I'll jump in here. I think racial equity lens is a really interesting phrase that I've been hearing a lot lately. And it's interesting to me because my whole life is viewed through a racial equity lens, right? Like, as a person of color, my worldview is shaped on the experiences as a woman of color. Like, I have seen my family members and other people in my community go through or be treated differently because of how they look and how they dress and who they are. So yeah, I just wanted to make that comment that I think it's really great that a racial equity lens is being given more focus, because it just shows that the voices of people of color are being heard and those experiences are being taken into account. And I also want to shout out the Office of Equity and Inclusion at the City of Dallas. Through my work at the City of Dallas, I support that office. I support the Chief of Equity and Inclusion. And the Office of Equity and Inclusion is doing amazing work in the city to bring equity not only internally within the city, but also externally with residents. So I highly encourage you guys to check out the Office of Equity and Inclusion, and all. Their Twitter handle is @EquityDallas, so make sure you guys follow them on Twitter and definitely engage with us. We do a lot of community events, including Undesign the Red Line, which is a virtual tour on redlining in Dallas in the next month. So definitely check that out.
And I will say, on the flip side, as somebody with privilege, as somebody that's white, understanding that I do have privilege, and understanding that my experiences have been very different, and doing the best I can to listen and to learn and of others in the community. And as somebody that works for a nonprofit, understanding that philanthropy in some cases has kind of been the curator and have expanded a lot of the inequities that we see. And so doing, our organization is taking a look inside and trying to educate ourselves on anti-racism, what we can do to better understand the lived experiences of folks in our community, so then we can become advocates. And we understand that this is a journey, we must go on, but doing a better job to really hoping to then elevate, identify those voices in the community so that we can include not just donors in the process of developing new initiatives and advocating for policies, but also including all members of the community to participate in identifying the solutions that are needed for our community.
Absolutely. So how do you suggest kind of, you touched on it, Stephanie, and you all touched on it in your last comments, but how do you suggest kind of beginning to have those often difficult conversations, right, around the exclusion that has occurred, right, through many stages, right, of the fight for women's suffrage and so many other social justice fights, right, thinking strategically, right, thinking specifically about the strategic exclusion of Black women, of Indigenous, of AAPI women, right, of women of color in the process, even in the pro-suffrage narrative, right? So that recognizing that, so that we don't continue to perpetuate those patterns of inclusion.
I think for me, as someone who's like targeting the youth and ensuring that message is being heard by the youth of Dallas, the really strategic exclusion of like these narratives within textbooks, within schools, I think is something that is necessary to focus on. A lot of the times, the reason why we don't even have these conversations with individuals who are younger than 21, younger than 18, is because there's just simply not that information out there. They haven't received that information before. And I think it's necessary to present that information to individuals to even have a conversation about it. If people don't know about the inequities in voter suffrage and the inequities that even are occurring right now with redlining and gerrymandering, like Summer mentioned, there's no way we can ever actually engage with that. There's no way that we can ever solve the problems. So ensuring that the youth of Dallas and the youth as a whole are understanding what's going on and know of the things and the strategic exclusion and the active exclusion of certain members of our community is necessary to even have that conversation in the first place.
Yeah, I absolutely second those comments, Ashley. I think it's so important that our schools educate students on these equity issues. I remember when I was in high school, I did a paper or a presentation on women's suffrage, but it had, the way I learned it, it did not have that racial equity lens. And I didn't learn about the racial fight for suffrage until probably late college. So I absolutely think that there needs to be more efforts to educate our students and have these candid conversations and not be ashamed to have those conversations. Like, we need to be candid, we need to be open, we need to be collaborative. And then I also want to say that when we do have these conversations, we need to have a common understanding that when one group is uplifted, it doesn't mean that another group is like downplayed. We're not putting down other people when we're uplifting everyone. And when we approach these conversations, we have to establish a common understanding that we're here collaborating together. Is not an adversarial experience, and it's supposed to be something that's enlightening and healing. And after we have those conversations, just like we're having right now, there needs to be action, there needs to be follow-up, there needs to be some implementation. And I think it's really on our leadership to implement those changes and make sure that the people's voices are being heard and being followed up on.
Definitely. And actually, Summer, that's a great segue to the next question, which is, what would you like to see the institutions and communities that you work with in the nonprofit sector, in government, with young people and in the community? How would you like to see those institutions collaborate to empower and engage the communities that you all are serving? I know it's a big question. There's so many institutions that you all are working with in local government, but also in the nonprofit sector, right? I know you all touched on some of those collaborations, right? Whether it's coalition building, what are some of those other ways, right, that the institutions that are supposed to be serving folks in the community are maybe better connected to the communities that they're trying to help?
So if I can, I want to actually kind of throw out a call to action, but it seems like this question, it seems so relevant, especially if we're talking about barriers to voting. But our county right now is in the process of identifying the next elections administrator. And I don't think it's really been discussed widely, but we know that the current elections administrator is going to be retiring. And so I think this is an opportunity for our county and the community to talk about what we're hoping to see with the next elections administrator, how we're wanting to prioritize more accessibility to voting for our students, for our seniors, for our communities of color, how we're wanting more transparency, accountability. We're wanting more data-driven decision-making, looking at data to identify sites and not just the rec centers and the libraries and the easiest sites that we can identify, but really identifying the data on where people where voters are located, where are the communities that have the lowest rates of access to a vehicle, to really identify where we want sites to ensure that people are able to vote. And, you know, in other communities, they've done some creative stuff to ensure that individuals are aware of all of the ways that they can vote, and also creating drop-off sites, which I know is unfortunately controversial, but really trying to look to the future on what elections could look like in 10 years, rather than just merely trying to respond to current election trends or needs based on COVID, but really looking at the growth that we're going to see in our community and the next generation of really modernizing the elections process. So that would kind of be my call to action and what I think is really necessary to, and one way that we can all get involved.
And I've mentioned this before within my introduction, but I just think it's super necessary for those in government, those within the nonprofit sector, communities at large, to understand the importance of the youth vote, the importance of just any woman of color being able to vote, and those in the youth who are trying to vote right now, but either don't have the resources or just don't know about the importance of their vote. Being able to engage that subset of voters is super important, because without them, we're not going to understand the legislation that happened and that's being created right now. We're not going to be able to grapple with the effects of legislation that's implemented. It's super necessary to focus on those groups and focus on groups that typically don't have that advocacy, in order to ensure that we have a democracy that's working as it should be in the future.
And then from a local government perspective, I think all local governments can always do a better job at doing outreach, deliberate outreach to groups that are hard to reach or may not have traditionally interacted with the government before. And I think it's on the onus of governments to really help educate people on how to be civically engaged and how they can get involved beyond just voting. And so to close out, my call of action is to, after you vote, make sure that you talk to someone, whether it be your friend or your family member or your neighbor, and make sure that they have a voting plan as well. And then after that, in 2021, think about what your civic engagement action plan is going to be. So in 2021, my goal is to find a new organization to volunteer with and start volunteering with them regularly, so that I can be a part of building that community of care.
Great. Yeah, and I think just to echo everything that you all said is, yeah, definitely vote early, right? If you've already voted, great. If you can vote and you already voted early, congratulations. Get 5 other people, right? Your 5 friends, 5 family members who you know, maybe you're thinking about it, maybe just don't feel prepared or feel like they have all the information, right? So, you know, help them print out their sample ballot, help them pull it up, right? You can't take your phone into the voting booth, but you can print out your sample ballot. So, you know, get familiar with it, help them, you know, look up their address on vote411.org, right? Look, whatever those, you know, Ballotpedia, all of these great resources that are out there, right? On DallasCountyVotes.org, folks can find their sample ballot. And then, you know, remembering that you are the best messenger, right? Your family members, your friends, they want to hear from you. They want to hear, they probably see about the work that you're doing, or, you know, the things that you're involved in. And you are going to be the best messenger to get, you know, who has that relationship, that existing relationship in those communities, to make sure that those communities are represented, that their voices are heard, not just in this election, but, you know, in years to come. We got the Texas legislative session coming up, and, you know, we're going to post-census, all of these different things, right, that are going to happen, redistricting, that are going to determine the next few decades, right, of our future here in Dallas and Texas and in the country. So I don't know if you all have anything remaining in the last 2 minutes, any other things that you want to add. It's been an amazing conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. I kind of just want to quickly piggyback off of what you said, Liz, and what Stephanie said, is that being in COVID kind of presents us with a special opportunity, because governments are looking at new ways and new innovative policy interventions that can help build a stronger and healthier community. So if anything, now is the time to really put your bold ideas out there and advocate for yourself and advocate for your family and for your community. So this is the time.
Great. Yeah, Stephanie, is there anyone else? Is there anything else you want to plug? Anything else that you would like folks to do or consider before they head out? From our session today.
No, I think we've covered it. Vote, vote, vote.
Absolutely. Vote early. The last day to vote early is this Friday, October 30th at 7 p.m. Polls close at 7 p.m. Make sure you get out there and get everyone that you can out there. And please vote. Thank you all so much for this amazing conversation. It's been an honor. And yeah, enjoy the rest of the conference. There's some amazing sessions going on. So thank you so much for joining us today.